Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Nick Rohn, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm excited for a program with David Totman today. David's ALN Senior Fellow, ASCE, that's American Society of Civil Engineers, liaison to ISO TC 251 on asset management, and also the CEO at Waterventions. And we've had David on many programs before, and we're excited to have him back today to talk about the EPA Water Asset Management Framework as part of this Water Asset Leadership series we're doing here. But before we get to today's program, we just want to thank our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, as well as all our organizational members for helping making program like this possible. So thank you for our continuing members. And if you're out there wondering how our organizations could work together, please reach out. We really think we have a great way of improving the mission outcomes of almost any organization. So with that, we'll just mention some upcoming events. We have on the 5th a program, Value and Benefits from Asset Management. That's with the Australian Asset Management Council. And this one is on electricity generation asset management. So that's February 5th at 5 p.m., a different time for our Australian colleagues. And then this series of water asset leadership continues on the February 6th at 3 p.m. So that's in 1 week, where we'll unveil an AI asset management assessment tool for water assets and all assets. And that's from our very own Jennifer Zach and Mentor APM. Mike, do you want to come on and talk about some more upcoming events or recent and current events?
Yes, thank you very much. The value and benefits from asset management, the program on electricity generation. For the first time, we're going to have two North American presenters. The Western area, Bonneville Power Administration and Hydro Quebec. And I just saw the presentation this morning from Hydro Quebec, and that's going to be really good. So that'll be exciting. And we've got upcoming programs that aren't listed yet with Kahua and CMMC. One of their clients is going to join. And also, Kahua has invited the Asset Leadership Network to present at their federal forum in April. So we keep on developing more programs, more ways of getting the word out to people about leaders needing to take action with asset management. And David Totman is one of those leaders who are doing that. He is a lightning bolt at the American Society of Civil Engineers, keeping them focused on asset management. He's ALN Senior Fellow. He keeps us up to date on the things that are going on in the water industry. And he started his own company now, Waterventions. Before we get into EPA frameworks, David, why don't we do a couple things? First, tell us a little bit about this Waterventions. Then we were in a panel yesterday with the Government Finance Officers Association. And so we want to talk a little bit about that. And also the report, the Presidential Commission, a little bit of overview on that. So tell us something about Waterventions.
Yeah, thanks, Mike and Nick. Happy to be here. And I think we all know the most value that comes out of these webinars is our Q&A session and not just a figurehead talking. So I'm looking forward to to the Q&A session. Yeah, so Waterventions, many of you may know I've been in the water industry for quite some time. I've done government service, I've done consulting, and I've done big tech. And it's time to follow my heart and tackle some of the biggest water challenges potentially that are still challenges in the industry. And it's a difficult thing for any one big tech company to kind of pay attention, because one of the things near and dear to my heart are small systems, small water systems. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But actually, a lot of you may not know I got my start in irrigation. way back when. And so, I've filed as an inventor and following, the whole design manufacturing space. And so got some things in the works that don't exist that need to exist, and I'm excited more than ever to have launched Waterventions. We basically custom CNC design manufacturing, of course, always the GIS consulting, the asset management consulting. But yeah, it's kind of refreshing to be able to chart my own destiny. So that's Waterventions, and if any water nerds that want to look at the logo, it's very intentional. It's actually a water molecule chain with the 104-degree hydrogen to oxygen bond, and the appropriate rate 1.3 to 1 ratio of the oxygen to hydrogen nuclear.
You are such a geek,
Yeah,
David. I
yeah.
love it. I love it.
That is Waterventions, and stay tuned. There's a website and everything. Anyway,
Well, we can't wait to have you back when one of your first inventions comes out.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, there we go. The Waterventions. That's what's going to be paying the bills. The second thing and this was kind of announced in December. I had spent pretty much the bulk of 2024 on something I wasn't allowed to talk about. We were in non-discovery mode, but I was appointed to a presidential subcommittee, the National Infrastructure Advisory Council, one of their subcommittees, not the committee, but a subcommittee. And we spent the year basically researching and talking about promoting infrastructural health and what that means across all industries, and delivered Dr. Conrad Vial our chairman, delivered the report to the White House in December, and that report's available. I think we're going to provide the link to that. And basically it was, really coming down to, we're still kind of in the throes of IIJA, but then what are we going to do with the funding? And then is the funding enough? And the report definitely kind of says the funding was not enough. It's a drop in the bucket. And that goes along with what we at American Society of Civil Engineers kind of say is, the IIJA was a down payment on our aging infrastructure, and we need to do more. And that'll actually lead us kind of into our EPA discussion, because water has a uniqueness to it, I think, that blends asset management into all things water. But yeah, so I was very proud to have served on that presidential subcommittee. It's it's under the Department of Homeland Security, so everything was under NDA, and I couldn't talk about it on LinkedIn, and even now there's some things, but it's a privilege to be able to serve and promote, and asset management was part of it. I actually happened to be the AI, artificial intelligence briefing lead, given my previous roles in big tech. And so basically the moral of the story was that, AI is here to stay, and it's in infrastructure, and we've got to we don't want to stifle it, but we need guardrails, because just like any computer, garbage in, garbage out, AI just gets you there faster. And so when we have these automated control systems, we need to make sure we have kind of some guardrails on how we implement some of that technology. So but it is here to stay. It is going to make the water industry better. That is for sure. To be used for good. And we'll see how the AI picture plays out. So Waterventions, the report. Next was going to be.
We were on a panel yesterday.
We were on the panel with GFOA.
And Government Finance Officers Association,
yeah,
which is state and local municipalities. And it was one of their first big asset management programs.
Yeah, and it was a privilege and an honor to be, talking with you, Mike, on talking to the folks. And we had Earl Jackson from Colorado, from Denver, and it was. I shared with them that when I was at Colorado Springs Utilities leading the asset management program there, my single most educational engineering moment came at the hands of my chief financial officer, right? Because, I was doing asset management pre-ISO. It was back with the IIMM days, even pre-PAS 55. And, I'd done all the math, did all the calculations, and I was, so, proud to go in requesting, $150 million to replace all the cast iron in the city. And my chief financial officer said, great, that I hear you, but you have 8 million. Figure it out. And so, being a public servant, you're on a fixed income with your rate structures. And so it was probably the best engineering educational moment I had in asset management was, to say, okay. And we were an organization that prided ourselves on doing things right. I mean, we were professionals and we did things right, but, asset management taught us, how to do the right thing. And that created, made us make, hard decisions because it came down to funding and balancing the budget and doing the most with every dollar that, was given to us from our ratepayers. So that's a lifelong lesson that will never go away. And so, yeah, it was a privilege to talk to the GFOA, those folks, and kind of let them know how important they are in asset management and why they need to be aware of all things, even ISO 55,000, right? Read up on the various standards that exist.
Your work at Colorado Springs and what you learned from the chief financial officer there is a great setup for talking about the EPA frameworks and how those frameworks help people to get where you got. But before we go there, we still have one more little thing that just slipped my mind. So why don't we just go right into the transition between the EPA frameworks helping organizations like Colorado Spring to understand water asset management?
Sure. So with the Environmental Protection Agency, a fun fact, I say, if you just use their search engine, every website, every organization has a little search engine. If you type in asset management on the EPA website, you get over 300,000 hits. Okay. So asset management is a big deal at the EPA. And they, have been doing asset management actually for a very long time. And I think they were doing asset management before they even called it that. And that was a lesson learned, at my utility as well. We had been doing things, Colorado Springs Utility started its electric utility in the late 1800s. And they were doing aspects of asset management, but never even called it that. And the EPA, one of the things I think is unique in water, and the department, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is all about water quality, right? They're not a Department of Water Quantity organization. They are a Department of Water Quality, if you will. That's their kind of their mission, to help protect the health and safety, welfare, if you will, almost like an ASCE, mantra, but on our nation and the water quality. And it goes back to the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act and those sorts of things. But in water, water quality is a function of water quantity. They go part and parcel, right? You can't, all the water in the world, if it is insufficient to drink, you might as well be in the desert. And if you have the purest of water, but it not very much quantity, you're still kind of in the same boat. So water quality and water quantity go hand in hand. And water quantity is a function of our infrastructure, right? So in water, that's one of the unique things of water delivery is it's the amount of the product, but it's also the quality of the product. And it's a function of the systems that deliver that water. And so, the EPA was well aware of that. They have been for a couple decades. And I think, we can show the EPA buzzword bingo word search later, but the EPA is full of acronyms. And Mike, I know how much you love acronyms, and I'm guilty. I'm very guilty of spewing 3 and 4 letter acronyms all the time. So I'll make sure I kind of spell things out. But there was kind of an instrumental document or program at the EPA that kind of started everything back in 2001. There was what they called the Capacity Assurance, Management, Operations, and Maintenance Manual and Program, if you will, called CMOM. And CMOM was kind of unheard of, right? It was basically, here was a regulatory agency that was trying to say, hey, you really need to take care of your pipes and pumps and pump stations and water treatment plants, right? Because if you take care of them, water quality is a good byproduct of a well-maintained, well-run system. And so the CMOM program back at say the turn of 2000, they were promoting that. They didn't call it asset management. They called it CMOM. And it was just good business on how to run a municipal water system. So I think they've been doing asset management for a very long time, and they just didn't call it that. The kind of the premise of our conversation, the 5 components, the 5 elements of the EPA framework, if you will, is also very much a function. I tend to call it almost like the journalism, the journalist stories, the who, what, where, when, why, and you throw in the H, how. Asset management very much is that, and the EPA has had that in their framework for a very long time, right? The basic tenets of asset management, they wanted to know, with your asset inventory, what do you got? Where is it? What condition is it in? The next, that's kind of one. The next one was levels of service, which, a lot of people don't think about, but that was a main tenet for me as well at the Colorado Springs Utilities. Like, what is your contract with your customers, right? They're going to pay your bills, monthly bills, hopefully. When the water comes out of the kitchen sink, they want it to be clean. They want decent pressure so I can take my shower, wash my clothes, those sorts of things. But that level of service is that's your contract with your customers, right? And so the EPA has understood that for quite some time of what is your level of service, for this water delivery. Criticality is kind of the third one, because a pipe is not necessarily a pipe is a pipe is a pipe. I have transmission lines, which are higher criticality than maybe distribution lines, which may be higher quality or higher criticality than service lines, right, at the actual home. Although the homeowner will say the service line is most important, but the concept of criticality, all right, and also a major thing that we learned in Texas, the generators are a highly critical element because no electricity, no pumps, no water. So you have to understand critical path as well as the criticality of various assets. I think one of the interesting things that's evolving, and we're not there yet, and we're not the best at that, is the life cycle costing, right? Is understanding, and that's one thing that's been going on at American Society of Civil Engineers is kind of, okay, pipe design engineer, you're really good at designing pipes, but you kind of have to think about how they're going to be operated, maintained, and disposed of. And many civil engineers have said, well, that's not my job. And it's like, well, no, it needs to become your job, And so understanding full life cycle cost I think is being threaded in every aspect of the plan, design, build, operate, maintain sort of, rinse, repeat life cycle. And so ASCE is getting better. Everyone's getting better at understanding. While my job may be this one thing, actually, I need to think about the entire workflow. Of course, then that just feeds. That would have been the fourth tenet, life cycle costing. The fifth tenet then is really, then long-term funding, right? And the concept of sustainability, which we could go a whole nother webinar on green infrastructure, but sustainability has to include fiscal sustainability. And that was a big lesson learned, I learned in finances, again at Colorado Springs and like utilities across the country. When we were in our construction boom, housing was exploding and every city was growing, what we called tap fees, which was a fee that a developer charged for the homeowner to connect to the water system. Those were rampant and flush. We had tons of cash. So we didn't worry about, our O&M. We had tons of cash, or I shouldn't say capital either. But when the housing, market crashed and development kind of stopped, all that money stopped coming in, and we realized that our rates weren't even covering base cost, right? And so, long-term funding really, comes into play, and that's where our friends at like GFOA and others are super important to understand, the long-term funding. But that's, one of those big challenges I think many utilities are facing. The current rate structures aren't, supporting what they need, especially for infrastructure investment. And quite honestly, that's the huge problem if we kind of talk about small systems. So I'll table that a little bit and let you engage. But those were the five
Yes.
kind of tenets of the EPA framework.
So that is great. And what's important of that is that it's a federal agency that has set this framework up to help state and local governments be more efficient. And Jack Kelly, who's on the call, was similarly surprised to you at how much content the EPA has on asset management. And we wanted to use this as a way of really giving them credit for what they have done. They are a leader in this area, along with the Department of Transportation and the MAP 21 bill that has asset management plan requirements in the legislation. So frameworks are so important that this year we're going to be talking more about various frameworks around the world. But can you share anything about how this framework has been useful or can be useful to organizations?
Well, I think it definitely it's I think it pays homage to the fact that there are certain kind of undeniable truths of asset management, right? And we saw in the International Infrastructure Maintenance Manual, if I remember that, IIMM from down under, public available specification 51 over in the UK, and now of course ISO 55000. There's certain foundational elements and undeniable truths, if you will, about asset management. And I think the EPA, dialed into that 20 years ago with those five tenets. And so, just like say, understanding a good journalistic story, the who, what, where, when, why, how, it's applying those basic tenets, those fundamental truths of, how we kind of need to look at the long-term, picture. And one of the big challenges I think that framework is necessary for municipal water systems is, the EPA, theoretically, they've been around for a long time. Theoretically, they're going to be around for a long time. Municipalities are around for a very long time, but yet their governance, they're especially, in Colorado Springs, we're a municipally owned utility. our leadership changed, if you will. The city council changed, every 2 and 4 years as the different districts and things. But you had long-term challenges with short-term governance, and council members kind of had the fire of the day, if you will. But yet, you couldn't disrupt an entire, transmission line project based on, kind of political whim. And so I think those tenets, what the EPA has been doing, what we need to promote is, infrastructure is there to stay, as long as there are humans. The politics and the governance sometimes comes and goes. And so I think, an asset management governance, and that's exactly what, we talked about in the GFOA was, it kind of starts from the top. You get leadership buy-in, they buy into the framework. And when they are gone, the organization continues to follow the framework, because to me, it's just common sense. It's logic. It's an undeniable truth of those 5 components of what do you got? Where is it? What is it there for? Who is it serving? How are you going to pay for it? That framework should resonate with, all organizations, all utilities, all anyone that provides services, because it really is a service-oriented framework.
And that's one of the reasons why we want to highlight that is we know that federal agencies are doing good at helping state and local governments be more efficient. And I just want to get that out there a little more, because it's not just for water asset management. That framework works for any type of organization. So
yeah,
there's
I think
benefits.
I think what amazed me when I kind of graduated into ISO, if you will, from IIMM PAS 55 to ISO, and the work that I do on TC 251 was, asset management applies to music, right? IP protection, and any kind of asset that has a life cycle that you wish to continue and to be sustainable, the ISO frameworks apply. And I think that it kind of, as a pipes guy, it kind of blew my mind about applying, standards to the music industry. But I'm sure IP is just as important as, water in a pipe. So I think that's again, testament to why these frameworks are important and why they work.
And Nick, if you can bring up the special presentation that David made.
Oh,
the 5 principles are very straightforward, but of course, when you drill down, there's a lot to it beyond just those 5 tenets. So go ahead, Nick, next slide. But let's go to the answer slide so that it's a little easier for people. All right, and then go to the final slide.
Yeah, we're
to begin to explain what these acronyms are.
Yeah, we were having a little bit of fun, and again, Mike keeps me on my toes when I spew acronyms and don't spell them out, and so actually the very first one, right? So we talked a bit about CMOM, right? Been around since 2001. Then came, a lot of people started talking about EPA's simple, which really was, it wasn't simple, it was called STEP, second to the bottom there. Simple tools for effective performance, was just like them talking to small systems saying, hey, I know you're a small system, but, at least start figuring out what you got, right? And so, a lot of these terms, surround each other. CMOM, I mentioned was in the beginning. I had the luxury of being at the utility that was under a consent decree of sanitary sewer overflows. And so we had to up our game in managing our sewer system. And so that's where CMOM and SSOs kind of came into play. It was kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will. Um, we have all seen in the news the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, and in water, we were very thankful for the 55 billion that was put into the IIJA for water that was going to be then basically distributed, if you will, through the EPA's management of the state revolving funds, the SRFs. Kind of a factoid on all that was 55 billion was awesome. The ASCE infrastructure report card financial gap was 80 billion a year in water and sewer. They were giving us 55 billion over 5 years. So you missed it by that much. But again, we're thankful. We're thankful for the funding. And yet when you drill into it, the 55 billion, 40 billion was only 40 billion was new money. 15 billion was already part of the program. So it's like, okay, that's fine. But if you look on the EPA website, now there's, as of January 10th, plus or minus, really only 12 billion has actually been pushed through the system and committed to projects, right? So even the 55 billion we couldn't spend fast enough to get out to projects, because then that gets us, into supply chain and a bit of the onerous process for applying for these funds. And then just, what you need to do when you get these funds and all that. So, funding is kind of, one of the number one challenges is just quantity is not as much, even though we don't have enough funding. It's just getting to it and getting it actually allocated, allotted to projects seems a bit of the challenge. So, and that's definitely a bit of an issue with small systems. But one of the important things that came about that kind of elevated the importance of asset management, and even then they didn't really quite call out asset management, and missed opportunity, I think. But the very first one, OEA, right? The America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018, under then, President Trump, actually came out and said, hey, everyone 3,300 population or above, if you provide water to a bunch of humans, over 3,300 population in your in your congregation of infrastructure and humans, you need to do the following things. And the first was an assessment, basically, right? A condition assessment. What do you got? Where is it? They didn't call it asset management. They just said you need to do an assessment, but also threw in risk, right? And emergency preparedness, which was, we don't talk about enough, I think, in asset management, but that was part of OEA. You needed to do the two things. You need to understand, do an assessment of your infrastructure and do a risk assessment, whether it be natural threat, terrorism, those sorts of things. And then you need to update. The main requirement is to update your emergency response plans, because not everyone had an asset management plan, but every community has an emergency response plan, right? And so they were to say this by law in 2018, everyone was supposed to go, well, that was when it was established, and they gave, a grace period for you to comply. But every single water utilities, that meant basically, over 10,000 water utilities across the country, from Mount Olive, North Carolina to New York City, all had to have, respond to this OEA. And, it just had asset management written all over it. I mean, I remember back when, in one of my former companies, I joined with a major, CMMS company, and I did a 5-part webinar boot camp series on complying with OEA. And so, if you look in the details, I think we're still, those small towns are still trying to comply, because they're all like, what is asset management? What does this assessment require? I don't have the funding. I don't have the technical expertise. And I think that's just one of those big challenges out there in rural, small water systems, is even responding to a WIA.
Well, David, this has been a wealth of information. Really appreciate your time. And we've got to say to people who need to move on, thank you for joining us. But we do have some questions. So
Sure.
if you can stick around, if anybody else wants to stick around, they're welcome
Of
to.
course.
So Jennifer asked, Zach says that the EPA provides excellent resources and guidance also through EPA. Oh, someone just, what are some of the challenges to initiatives? Wait, there it is. What are the biggest barriers for utilities? They struggle with implementation of asset management programs. What can they do to overcome that struggle?
Well, I think it really comes down to, comes to resources. I think medium to large utilities, um, they have, because they're a medium to large, um, they have a resource pool that's larger, right? So they have technical talent. They have people who live there, so there's kind of funding that goes with the rates. There's an awareness of technology, because they have a billing system, they have an HR system, they have, so they have GIS, they have a lot of those things that are kind of just to run the utility by itself. Those are tenets of asset management. Um, and the regulatory piece, that's kind of we've refined and we've sharpened the pencils on regulations over the years, which have made it more difficult for others to actually comply. Our microscopes have gotten better and better and better. Is that a good thing? Yes, for protecting public health, but also it just means we're getting into a more costly understanding. I always bring out my eye doctor phoropter analogy. When you go for glasses, better one, better two. Okay, they could cut you a prescription right there and call it good, and it's a cheap glass. But they go to better, better five, better six, better seven, better eight. They dial in that prescription
Yeah.
and get you exactly what you need. But I think that's been the biggest challenge is understanding at what level do I need to understand what's going on with my assets, and how do I pay for everything, and who do I get to manage it?
And how is that different with the smaller?
Well,
Is it
let's say,
pretty much the same?
yeah, I mean, the small systems I think are challenged because, again, for one, we don't have a massive influx of new talent, new humans that are educated moving into small towns, right? There's an exodus out of the small towns, so their customer base is eroding. And when you're talking about sustainability, there are less and less people to actually pay the water bills. And so, how do they fund the projects? And they, well, go after these federal grants. Well, sometimes they're so small they don't even know how to write a grant proposal. And so there's just a lot of challenges with smaller systems on having the tech, having the people, having the funding, understanding the need, right? Many small towns are volunteers of people who just live there and have never been exposed to any of these educational resources. And so, that is just a challenge of, we would love to have big tech kind of come in and just donate the technology to everybody and create one big monster system, but that's where some of the solutions, the word regionalization comes into play, bigger utilities adopting, if you will, smaller utilities and saying, please use our resources. That's being met with various degrees of success and failure, actually. Yeah, I mean, so that's one of the things that's near and dear to my heart, to try and figure out how to crack that nut.
Well, let us help you. If there's anything that the ALN can do with waterventions to focus on small water utilities, we'd be
Well,
happy.
if we get our ALN members, everyone will split up the 9,000 small water systems to each member, and each member can take 300 water utilities and do pro bono consulting. That will fix it.
we have executive briefings that get the foot in the door on
Yeah,
that. So,
yeah, yeah.
and then Marty is talking about incorporating into larger, if it doesn't have the ability to fund the system. Marty, that's more challenging a question that can be answered in the limited remaining time we have.
Well, yeah, that, and that's so Marty, good question, because we never thought, again, water specifically, right? The best water system was one that never, people didn't even know about, really, right? There's things from American Public Works Association about unsung heroes. There's things that we were doing our job if they didn't know we existed, and water was cheap, and because it falls from the sky. Well, there's a lot you have to do from rainfall to get it into the kitchen sink. And people just didn't understand that, and we didn't promote that, right? We didn't talk about the systems, the infrastructure it took to deliver water, and we were very prideful to say, oh no, it's okay, it was cheap, and we don't want to toot our own horn, a very prideful group. And I think that's what's really kind of come up to bite us, is people didn't know, and they've always had very low water rates, and that's going to have to change for our future. And so towns just didn't think about that, right? That was just kind of what the industry did.
Yeah. So the thing that I forgot at the beginning is a great thing to close with before we bring Nick on. The upcoming ASCE report card.
Oh yeah. So report card every 4 years. And what we talked about with the webinar yesterday, ASCE report card is coming out in March of this year. Stay tuned. Everyone's excited to see what happened to the grades based on IIJA funding. But again, with all the challenges we said about getting the funding out and into projects, we'll see how the grades actually do change. But again, March of this year, we'll see a new 2025 report card. The asset management lens was, as Mike and I are kind of talking about, the 2021 report card mentioned it 38 times. The 2017 was like 9, and the 2013 maybe 2 or 3, and the 2009 had nothing, right? So asset management's growing. The terms are growing in the American Society of Civil Engineers, and that gets us into full life cycle costing and understanding, as an engineer, what you need to be cognizant of in the full life cycle of assets. So asset management, I think, is growing. I'm proud of that at ASCE, and there's hundreds of people involved, right? All of our engineering firms that are members, they're responsible, not myself, on getting asset management promoted, which is a good thing. So yeah, stay tuned for March of this year for the report card.
What we were saying at the GFOA program yesterday was the report card shows why you need asset management, and therefore here's what you need to do with asset management. And we were talking first start with a policy. That's just a good place to start.
And it blends well with everything that the administration wants to do with government efficiency, right? Asset management is the framework of efficiency and optimization, and so it's a story that has to resonate, in the upcoming years. So
excellent. I love going out with that. So if Nick could come in and wrap it up for us, thank you very much.
Of course. Yeah, thanks, David. And thanks to all our viewers who stuck around to the end. And thanks to the EPA for all the work they're doing, and our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, and all our members who help make programming like this possible and help spread the good word. And we are going to continue this discussion next week. On Thursday, we'll have the continuation of the Water Asset Leadership Series, but the night before, we have that Value and Benefits from Asset Management series on electricity generation asset management. So we have some upcoming events and more. We hope to see you there. Mike?
Yes, that next week with the AI and asset management assessment. I'm really looking forward to that because part of government efficiency is a requirement for technology and software improvements, and it's technology and software that are driving assets. So that's a direct impact on us, and AI is one of the ways that we're going to improve the management of our assets. So really looking forward to that, and the value and benefits from asset management program too. So thank you so much, David. Like
Yep.
Nick said, thanks to the audience. Really appreciate the interaction. And we'll see you next week.
Okay.